Gender pay gap, fair or unfair?
Unfair.
Do you think that you're being discriminated against based on your sex?
Honestly, yeah.
How's that male privilege feeling? Who are you to say that your job is worth more than what the market is willing to pay? I hope you have a nice day. Gender pay gap, fair or unfair?
What does that mean?
Bro, what's with the spin? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Common Ground Conversations, where we ask the important but controversial questions. Stunning day here in Melbourne. We're back at it again at Flinders Street Station, and we're going to be asking people the question, gender pay gap, fair or unfair? Let's see what people have to say. Alrighty, let me set the stage before we jump into things. According to the Australian Human Rights Commission, quote, Australian women are paid 17.5% less than men doing the same work, end quote. And they cite reasons like stereotypes and discrimination. And you know what? To a degree, fair enough. If there's a disparity between the average pay of men and women, or any two groups for that matter, then perhaps it's worth investigating why that disparity exists, just in case there is some unfair discrimination going on, because I think we can all find common ground here. We are against unfair discrimination based solely on one's sex or gender. But here is the catch. To assume that the disparity is necessarily a consequence of unfair discrimination, now that is careless and irresponsible. Let us not create problems where they do not exist for the sake of becoming saviors. In my research, what was particularly telling was that on a lot of these websites that purport an unfair gender pay gap, they go to great lengths to avoid the Voldemort-like C word, choices. Men and women are different in important ways, and I dive into the whole nature and nurture debate in some of today's convos, but as a consequence, we on average make different choices when given the same opportunities, namely with regard to hours worked and job types. We should expect a disparity in the average pay between men and women in egalitarian societies, and it shouldn't be controversial to say this. Men and women are different in important ways. So we hit the streets of Melbourne once again to see what people thought about the gender pay gap. Is it fair or unfair? I brought with me a couple of related sub-questions on the day, including how do you define the gender pay gap? What are its causes? Why do men and women work different hours? Why do they work different jobs? Is it nature, nurture, or both? What about the personality differences between men and women? Does that have something to do with it? What about their differing interest in things versus people? Does sexism exist in the workplace? If so, to what degree? Does it only run one way? Can men be victims of unfair discrimination as well? So if I go down a particular rabbit hole that doesn't interest you at any point, feel free to skip ahead using the timestamps I placed on the video. Once again, all the claims that I make are backed up with evidence that I'll pop up on the screen throughout the video. There'll be links to the sources in the description for you particularly curious ones, as well as an essay that I've written tying them all together and clarifying my position on the gender pay gap. Spoiler alert, I think it's fair. But as always, I'm open to changing my mind, as we all should be, so for me to believe that the gender pay gap is unfair, I'd need to see some solid evidence of a widespread unfair discrimination against women in the workplace based solely on their sex or gender. Now, we spoke to a variety of different people, young, old, male, female. We had around 20 to 30 combos on the day, but of course we haven't included all of them. We've deliberately selected for the combos that together explore all the key factors that we touched on. And it just so happens that the conversations we chose weren't with some of the young women we spoke to, just because I know someone in the comments is going to have an issue with that. But the women we did speak to, all of the points they made have been made by someone else in the video, so it shouldn't matter either way. It's not like their points or concerns have been selectively cut out, because they haven't. And lastly, it's always a blast hearing from you in the comments section or on our Insta, in our DMs, or running into you in person. So thank you again for all the support. Let's keep these combos going in our own lives. And with that said, let's jump into the first combo of today. Enjoy. Hey, what's up, boys? How are you? Yeah, the boys. What's up? Oi, boys, do you want to have a quick chat? No, nobody touches my mic. All right, gents. All right, so
He's the most left here. You probably want to interview him.
Gender pay gap, fair or unfair?
Unfair.
Bro, you can look at me. Yeah, you don't have to eat the microphone.
Unfair.
Okay, unfair. So, first of all, I'd like you to tell me what you think the gender pay gap is.
Yeah.
Like, how would you define it? And then tell me why you think it's unfair.
Be famous.
Okay. Oh, jeez.
Pressure's on. All the boys are watching.
Look, so the gender pay gap is the difference in how much women are getting paid and how much men are getting paid. That's in very simple terms.
Yep.
I understand that there's a variety of factors that are contributing towards that. Such as, obviously, there's some careers that women are more, prone to be in than men.
Yep.
So,
like what?
Well, it's based on stereotype, nursing.
Yep.
Yeah,
No.
I think so.
I mean, that's accurate though. Like
Yeah.
nursing, education, I know primary school teaching, there's a
Yeah.
huge discrepancy between men and
Yeah.
women.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of other roles where there are far more men than women. So
Yeah.
I guess if forget gender for the moment, if
Yeah.
you and I work different jobs,
Yeah.
is it fair that we get paid differently in your eyes?
Yeah, well, I think so. I think that there's certain things that are much harder to attain. So, for example, if you want to be a doctor, you have to work, so you have to go to uni for, many, many years. You have to work very, very hard. You have to, get quite high academic results to attain that course. So I think it's fair that, and the reason you have to do that is because of the service you're doing to society. So if you have to, do all that, I don't think it's fair that you should be paid the same as someone who got a diploma in 6 months.
100%. I absolutely agree with you. Okay, so we find common ground there.
Yeah.
Let's say that we have two different people and we have the same qualifications, we're working in the same role, we're contributing the same way to this particular company.
Yeah.
If I work more hours, do you think that it's fair that I get paid more than you? Or vice versa, right? Whoever works more hours is on average going to make more.
I think so, because in the end you're getting paid for work, and if you're doing more work than someone else, which is what's kind of being suggested by doing more hours, then you should be getting paid more.
Okay, common ground there as well. So my thesis, my core point is that in the research that I did for what the gender pay gap is and why it exists, the two main causes were men and women work different number of hours.
Yeah.
Full-time working men and women work different number of hours. So even if we're classified as full-time workers, men work more overtime hours on average. And then two, men and women choose different jobs of their own volition.
Yeah.
And I'm very much pro men and women being able to choose what kind of profession they want to go into and whatnot. So if I were to show you some evidence, which I won't do now, but perhaps you can see it later on the video that we upload. If I were to show you some evidence that the gender pay gap were, if not completely or at least a large part of it, were a consequence of men and women working different hours and men and women choosing different jobs, would you then come closer to my position that the gender pay gap is fair?
Well, yeah, I'd say so. I tend to approach things with if I don't know much about it, then I can't make up a very strong opinion about it.
Yep.
So
I like that, man. I like that.
Yeah, I don't have a very strong opinion on the gender pay gap. I've definitely heard stories of, women getting paid less or getting passed over for promotions. And I do believe that, some people are inherently, sexist, and that comes from their environments and that comes from their upbringing.
That's where I think you and I can find common ground.
Yeah.
Is I don't believe anyone should be discriminated for or against solely based on their sex.
Yeah, and so I think that there is going to be people like that in our society that, for one reason or another, are going to be, sexist. And so you'll see in jobs, people, if those people, gain positions of authority, then you're going to see women be discriminated against. And so I think there will be examples of that in the workplace. Again, I don't have any evidence of that. I've heard stories.
Yeah, I don't actually think you need necessarily statistics for that point to be very valid, right?
Yeah.
There are certainly sexist people in the world, and if one of those sexist people were in a position of authority and choosing to hire a particular person, undoubtedly that kind of sexist attitude will carry over into that.
Yeah.
What I have issue with is when people make claims of, is when people see a difference in the average earnings of men and women, and claim that it is largely or solely a responsible. Exactly. And I do not believe that disparity between groups is necessarily evidence of unfair discrimination.
Okay.
So that's why I would sit closer towards the gender pay gap is fair, unless I can be shown evidence on a wide
specific
scale.
case.
Specific cases, we can definitely draw a circle around and say, but if people are making the claim that, say, the 14% gender pay gap or whatnot is
purely a result of sexism,
that's where I have issue.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair.
What's your name, bro?
Luke.
Luke. Appreciate you taking the time, man.
No
My name's
worries.
Rich. Yeah.
Rich. Where can I see this video?
Common Ground Combos.
Okay.
If you search on TikTok, Common Ground Combos, you'll find us.
I'll have a look.
Awesome, man. Take care. See you. Yeah.
to come and say
I love your attitude already.
Thank
My name's
you.
Rich.
Rich, I'm Anne.
And lovely to meet you. Do you want to jump, Kerry, do you want to jump into the conversation as well? No, you just want to watch?
She
Okay,
just
that's all
hates
good.
birds.
I'm just watching.
Okay, well, I'll have one hand ready to karate chop any bird that comes in a 5 meter radius.
Sure.
But I agree with everything she says.
Okay, lovely.
So
You're like the cheerleader from the back. All right, sweet.
Thanks, Sal.
So, just to give you a little bit of context,
Yes.
we want to ask the important but controversial questions and then see if we can find common ground.
Sure.
So, today you can see we're asking gender pay gap, fair or unfair. I'd love to get your take, and then also just maybe starting with what do you see as the gender pay gap? How would you define it?
The gender pay gap is huge. I mean, if you look back on traditional roles such as nursing and teaching, where they were female roles, or actually nursing started with Catholic sisters, so there was no pay to little pay to very little pay as women. Now here we are 100 years later, and there's still a huge gap in relation to the really what were women roles to now. When you look at nursing, we've got a lot of men in nursing, but they still haven't raised the wage. Same in teaching, they still haven't raised the wage. Those were traditionally female roles, and it just hasn't caught up to where we are in 2022. So happy man?
Yeah.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, I was in banking before, and there was no gender pay gap. It was really more about the point of the women breaking the glass ceiling. It was very difficult to get into management. But whatever role you did...
For those of our viewers that might not be familiar with that term, the glass ceiling, how would you describe that?
Okay, so it really is the point where women could only go so far. Okay, those bank manager roles were, you know, it was the little old man with the beard and the balding head, wore the shirt sleeves and the tie, and you had to call him boss, or you had to call him Mr. Wills, or, you know, those sorts of things. So it was really, really difficult for any woman to get into that role, because when my mother worked in the Commonwealth Bank in the 60s, she was made to resign because she was getting married. So, you know, she couldn't have a role, and then later on they let married women work, but she had children. So, you know, it's that the bank has developed to the point that when they privatised Commonwealth Bank, there was a lot of equity there in relation to pay in the role, but we still had to push and push and push and push to get those roles. Now, in today's stakes, the banks don't really pay that much, so you don't see a lot of men working in retail banking like you would in Commonwealth Bank branches, you know, but a lot of them will be in the senior management roles in the city. So there's just that point where women don't get a chance.
Okay, so that's yeah, because I've heard that term before, but it's useful to have it kind of described by yourself. So I'm aware that there's quite a significant gender pay gap if we take all of the working men and working women in Australia, and it sits somewhere around that 30-31% mark. If we control for full-time working men and full-time working women, it drops to about that 16% mark. So if we just take full-time working men, full-time working women, why do you think that there is what's the root cause behind that gender pay gap there?
We haven't caught up. They still, back in the day, men were the breadwinners. They had to have the money. The women ended up with the little small part-time jobs. You know, they weren't taking on management and big responsibility. They were the checkout chicks, or they were the cleaners, or, you know, those low-paid roles. But even now, I think when you look at it, even from an HR perspective,
Do you work in HR now?
Not now, I'm a nurse now, but when I was in HR in the bank, you'd sort of, it was never said, but a lot of women would worry, I'll get that job, and what if I fall pregnant, you know, or, you know, I got a management role in the bank, and then 6 months later I was pregnant, and my boss said, what are you, a rabbit? So I had to take my 12-month leave.
I don't get that. Why?
Well, because I was reproducing. I was having a baby, you know. I was having my second child. I'd only just stepped into the management role, and I'd be in it for 13 months before I had to leave for 12 months. So I think he was frustrated by the fact that he then had to find someone else to do my job. If it had been a bloke, he never would have had to have gone on maternity leave.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So he wouldn't have had to, as the employer, he wouldn't have had to cater for someone who had the potential of having a child and taking time off. So let's say that I just want to walk you through my logic, and you can point
Sure.
me where I might be missing something. But from that 16% figure, it drops down to 14% when we then account for men working, on average, more overtime hours. So we can have full-time working men, full-time working women, but men still work more hours on average. My question was like, okay, why, if we then account for the hours worked, what accounts for that last 14% difference in the average earnings of men and women? And to me, it seems to be the jobs that men and women work. So then once we get to that point, it's like, are men and women choosing their roles, or are they being pigeonholed into particular roles? So for example, are women being pigeonholed into nursing, and nursing being a lower paying job?
Okay.
Or are men and women choosing different industries and different job types with different responsibilities, and as a consequence getting paid differently on average?
Well,
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, my daughter's 23. The course she just did at university wasn't there 23 years ago. So there are going to be media and communications, but majoring in social media and online content.
Okay,
Now, that was never there.
Yep.
It's big. It's huge with marketing and everything else. So there will be those jobs, and there will be opportunities for girls to branch out in that. But in a male-dominated world as a bank manager, all right, 21 years ago, I was earning more money as a bank manager than I do today as a registered nurse. I did 3 years of university, and I can save a life, but the guy that writes the home loan, is still getting more money. So it's been 21 years, and I'm still not earning more than I did before.
But isn't that the free hand of the market, so to speak, saying that the role that you're currently doing isn't as economically valuable as the role that you used to do?
Well, if you're dead, there's no economy for you, is there? You know what I mean? But
who are you to say that your job is worth more than what the market is willing to pay?
Well, it depends.
See what I mean there?
Absolutely.
'Cause by the way, I studied medicine for a while, so I very much value healthcare.
Oh, for
role.
sure, for
But
sure.
I'm curious as to why you believe that you ought to get paid more when that's not what the market is.
Well,
is
for the
giving that
role
industry.
of banking, all you've got to do is sell and cross-sell. It's not a difficult job. Anyone can do it. I can train a monkey to sell. You can sell ice to Eskimos. But it takes a certain sort of person
salesperson.
to be able to save a person's life, or manage a chronic disease, or immunise a community. You know what I mean? Like, you look at the work that's involved. Like, you could go to TAFE for 4 years and be an electrician and still earn more than a nurse. Well, electricians are really, really important. We need that sort of thing. So I don't want to harp on nursing, but it's all those sorts of things, the teaching roles, the cleaning roles, the checkout roles, all that sort of stuff, We're just looking at where the domination is, but I think that we're getting better and better at it because, like I said,
Sorry, domination in
oh well,
what?
the domineering, or that gap that you're talking about,
Between men and women, or between the different roles?
between men and women, because there are new roles, and those new roles are sometimes replacing old roles. All the jobs that we worked, some of them are gone. They've been gone in the last 20, 30, 50 years, okay, and we're getting new jobs and new roles and new university courses or TAFE courses or areas of work. So industry's changing big. BHP in the Illawarra, they've got this gender equity thing where they're employing women. That was the thing they wanted. You're a woman, you've got a job. You're working as a labourer, you're working as a trade assistant. So, some of these big companies are looking at gender equality as in opportunity to work, and in those big companies, you get paid for the role that you do, okay, not for anything else, whether you're a man or you're a woman.
Yeah, that's where we can definitely find common ground. I don't believe that anyone should be discriminated for or against based on their sex.
No.
I have two things that came to me while you were saying that. One is I'd love to unpack, is the goal gender equity or gender equality of outcome? Equality of opportunities. That's one thing I'd like to touch on. And then the second is, if we just, maybe let's pop that to the side for just a moment. if we control for those hours work that I mentioned before, and the gender pay gap sits at 14% in Australia, if we controlled for job type and level of experience and industry that they're working in, and then the gender pay gap were to disappear hypothetically, in that instance, to me, it seems like the appropriate question there is, what makes men and women land in those separate industries or jobs? Because if it is that pigeonholing or rigid stereotypes, then I'm not necessarily supportive of it. I'm libertarian in the sense that I want men and women to choose whatever you want to do.
Yeah,
pursue
absolutely.
it. But if the difference in job choice was actually a choice and not a consequence of rigid stereotypes, then that's what would lead me to have my current position, which is that the gender pay gap is fair.
Okay.
Is there, what makes you, or gives you the impression that, what I might be missing, that the reason why men and women are in different roles is because of those stereotypes, rigid stereotypes,
Oh, yeah.
as opposed to men and women genuinely choosing different industries.
And that's like in high schools now where they're really pushing STEM. They're trying to get girls into science and mathematics and
That's
engineering
good?
because absolutely, because they were male-dominated fields. You know what I mean? And for women to go out there and get those jobs, I believe again, working for companies, you would get pay equity in big corporations or in major employers. I think you're right. It is about choice. A lot of men won't choose to be school teachers or won't choose to be nurses because there's no money in it though. Like when I changed from banking to nursing, my friend said, there's no money in that. And I said, this is in my heart what I want to do,
But it's interesting because
that's my choice.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense is that in response to that, you're saying that if women choose more of those roles and there is more women in nursing, to get pay equity, nursing ought to get paid more, or nurses ought to get paid more. Whereas my response to that situation is you made the decision to go into nursing, and if there is a gender pay gap as a consequence of that, then I don't think it's unfair.
And look, in the roles...
That's so interesting.
Yeah, no, because in the roles, male nurses and female nurses get paid exactly the same amount of money each year. We get the pay rise. But if you do further study, then, you can be elevated in that. I don't think there's a pay difference within nursing, but I just think as far as male-dominated and female-dominated industries, there's just, you've got to find where your value is. As you said, economic value in these sorts of things. But, health, education, finance and industries, I really think that health should really be at the forefront.
It's definitely I think everyone ought to prioritise.
But as I said too, you can double the nurses' pay. We can't work any harder. You really need to employ more nurses. But we can't employ more nurses because by choice they'll go somewhere else because the pay's better.
Interesting. So if we could come back to, we touched on like gender equity. My sense, and we might find some disagreement here, but I'm all about it. Like this is I enjoy it. So my sense is the appropriate goal is equality of opportunity for both genders.
Yeah.
I want, and that's where again it comes back to that libertarian stance. I want men and women, really regardless of their gender, to be able to pursue what they want.
Yep.
But I also believe that men and women have underlying biological differences that manifest in personality differences as well. And so in for example, a preference for things versus people. And so I don't think that it's all a consequence of socialization, which is why if I'm pro men and women choosing what they want, and there are also, I believe, to be underlying biological differences behind the preferences of men and women, I'm okay with there being a difference in outcome between men and women as long as they've had equal opportunity.
Yeah.
When would you say that that is the appropriate goal, equality of opportunity, or is it equality of outcomes, say 50-50 men and women in CEO roles?
I think equality of opportunity, most definitely, because I think society is moving to the point now where, you know, if a man and woman went for a job and the woman's got, you know, the skills, the experience and everything else, I think there's a lot less judgment in relation to the factors. As I said before, we would think, oh, that woman's going to go off and have a baby and blah, 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 blah. It's all about the business. I think equal opportunity to get the job or to go for the role or to study in that area or to be in that area. You know, women are breaking through in male-dominated roles and men are coming into female-dominated roles. So, yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Awesome.
I think it's the opportunity to choose.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's not to say that some roles aren't, you know, still... And that's another thing when I say they're not well paid. So me and my job and not being paid, that's not about gender equality within the job. It's more about gender equality
between jobs and industries.
Yeah.
So with that gender equality or equality of opportunity, that being our shared goal.
Yeah.
Based on, I guess I have this underlying belief that, like I said, that there's a biological difference that between males and females, and that manifests in our choices and our preferences and personality. Mm-hmm. And that as a consequence of that, if given equal opportunity, we ought to expect differences in outcome and differences in representation. So say, for example, there's a role that might require a greater interest in things. Let's say, for example, engineering-based roles as opposed to a role that might be more
nurturing.
Something like nursing. It's very reasonable to expect a difference in the representation of males and females in those roles, and it'll have nothing to do with discrimination, unfair discrimination. So, in that instance, I mean, I guess first question that I have for you is do you agree with me that there is an underlying biological difference that can manifest itself as preference differences between males and females?
I think it's still just the old adage or the hang on of the wife at the kitchen sink, you know, doing all that. It's those gender roles that we have, that the man went out and worked and the woman stayed home. Now little girls don't just grow up with Barbies, they're growing up with Barbies that are Jane Goodall, you know, you can go and save the apes, or, you know, my daughter's going to wear, you know, navy blue if she wants to, and she can play football. My daughter played football, you know, it's all about, I think, not my generation, not yours, but I think in a couple of generations, it's really going to come to the fore. We're raising kids a little differently now, instead of those stereotypically blue and pink kids.
Yeah.
And what you do, a lot of the schools are making all those tacit things about, you know, whether you go into woodworking, metalworking, girls are getting to do all that sort of stuff at school now, you know, rather than just cooking and sewing. So I do think that not right now, but it's going to come, that opportunity, that equal opportunity to choose, it's growing all the time. And I think it's going to get better and better. But yes, biologically, but I think it comes down to, you know, the intergenerational disadvantage maybe of having a parent that maybe had traditional roles or traditional values or traditional ideas, you know, like...
just to really acknowledge that, like, if you grow up in a family that says, because you're a boy... Sorry, that's my alarm just going off. If you grew up in a family as a boy and your parents have very rigid stereotypes about what men do, you might be told and really pushed in a particular direction, you have to become the engineer. And if you are a girl who's born into a family with really rigid stereotypes, you, as a girl, you have to go into nursing. It's not appropriate for you to go into something like engineering.
Go and be a secretary.
Exactly. Stay at home, take care of the kids, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So that's where, again, I think we find a lot of common ground. I'm very much for you do what you want.
Yeah.
And I think we ought to maximise people's freedoms as much as possible to do exactly that, to maximise choice.
You've got to take the leap, though. You know, these kids that want to study music and be in music and be in the arts and things like that. I think, I don't know the statistics, but for every 1,000 that study it, how many actually make a living out of it? You know what I mean? Do you say to these kids, come and get your trade, and when you've got your trade, you can go and study that fancy stuff, and then if it doesn't work out, you can still be a plumber.
I actually think that that's part of the conversation that might get missed with young people nowadays is if you want to study music, no problems, but you take a big risk because it's a very, very small percentage of creators that are rewarded by the market and are, as a consequence, successful. Right? There is a high probability that you are not going to be part of that 1% that actually can make a living from it. Knowing that, I'm all for you taking the risk. Right? If you want to go ahead and take the risk, by all means. But if it doesn't work out, it's nobody's fault but your own.
Yours. It was your choice.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And do the parents push those kids and say, well, before you get into music, how about you get something behind you,
Yeah.
Again,
if sorry to interrupt, if I could just, I was trying to come back to that line of thought before. So if we can agree that there are some biological differences between male and female, but we can also agree that we want to break down rigid stereotypes that might actually pigeonhole people into industries that they don't want.
Yeah.
Would it, like my sense is that it would be reasonable that, let's say we remove the gender stereotypes.
Okay.
That we would find there would still be differences between male and female and their preferences, given the underlying biological differences. And
given the Barbie dolls and the Tonka trucks, maybe, But
I want to give you one more thing that I found really interesting.
Okay.
And are you familiar with Jordan Peterson?
No.
Okay.
Should I?
He's just a very, very interesting gentleman. But I came across an argument that he was making, where he was kind of presenting this study that looked at, it was a survey of 80,000 people across 76 countries.
Okay.
And their goal was to observe, as we remove those rigid stereotypes, what happens to the personality differences between male and female?
Okay.
And so if we believed that there was only socialization at play that was bringing about the differences between men and women, then as the countries became more and more gender equitable, or more and more removing of those rigid gender stereotypes, we would expect the personality differences between male and female to disappear. And what they found was the opposite. So it was really surprising. They found that in the Scandinavian countries, where we, I say we as a species, where we've done the most to remove or break down or at least weaken those gender stereotypes, the personality differences between men and women increased.
Really?
Which, right, and I had the same response. I was like, that's really counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Because that supports the notion that there is a significant underlying biological difference in the different choices that men and women make, and that if you allow men and women to do what they want, which I'm very much for, you actually get more disparity as opposed to more equality of outcome.
I'd be interested to learn more about that one.
Yeah, maybe we can link you afterwards.
I'd love to, because I just really thought that it'd be the other way around, because if you take away that gender, you take away those gender roles, I would have thought that it would open up different parts of the mind, like little children will do imaginative play, but as we get older, it's usually the boys that are the mathematical minds, and it's the girls that are the florally English literature sort of minds. So I would have thought,
that they would end up more similarly.
Yeah,
so did I.
yeah.
I thought the same thing, and so I found it very, very interesting. So maybe just to finish with my I guess why I believe the gender pay gap is fair. Currently, I'm open to, I guess I want all of my beliefs to be flexible, but based on the research that I've done, it seems that when we control for hours worked and job types, we end up with virtually no gender pay gap. So then my follow-up question to that is, for myself, this is what determines whether it's fair or unfair is, are men and women of their own volition choosing different roles, and as a consequence we end up with that gender pay gap, in which case I would say it's fair. Or are they being pigeonholed into roles that they don't necessarily want? And so it wouldn't be reasonable to say men and women choose different roles. It's more so that men and women work different roles, but it's a consequence of those rigid stereotypes.
I've worked in a role where I had good money and I hated the job. You can chase the money. You can say that choice is mine, and I could choose to be a coal miner and spend my days underground in a dangerous situation. But if my value or my skill or my ability or my passion lies elsewhere, as a passion, yes, it's my choice. But, again, I still sort of think that I can hear what you're saying. It is my choice, but chasing money is not always going to bring you the satisfaction. So if you can live with yourself, having a shitty job for the rest of your life. I think it was Jim Carrey who said his dad wanted to be a comedian. But he had a family and he decided, I'll be an accountant because being an accountant is responsible for my family. I need money. So Jim Carrey's dad became an accountant, lived his whole life in a job he absolutely hated, and then sees his son choose the job that he wanted and make something of it. So I don't think I could, that's why I left the bank. Our values no longer aligned. I couldn't work in a well-paying job if it really just was horrible. You know what I mean?
I know that I said I was going to stop there, but I'm so curious.
Enough.
So let's say that you and I were in that role originally, the same role, the banking role.
Yep.
And then we both had the opportunity to go and pursue something that we were more passionate about, but we were going to get paid less. If there is a gender stereotype that me as the man, I am responsible for providing and protecting for my family, financially speaking, and that perhaps as a woman there isn't necessarily that same rigid stereotype of that's the traditional role. It seems it would be more likely for me to not choose the passion career and sacrifice that in order to provide for my family.
I think,
Sorry, just to finish that thought, I guess that's an instance where those gender stereotypes may actually push us into particular job choices.
Yeah.
Is it fair? Well, I guess you've made the choice to step into becoming the provider and protector, financially speaking. But I guess there's a follow-on conversation to be had around, do we want to break that stereotype of males being the provider and protector financially? Yeah, that's a rabbit hole in and of itself.
Well, I would say to anybody who's in a job that they don't like, work hard but play harder. If you're going to do it, just make sure you go on the bloody holiday to the Maldives, or buy the brand new Beamer, or live in the best place you want to live. You know what I mean?
Beamer, so you preach. Preach.
But you know what I mean? Yeah. If you're doing something that you don't like, then at least make sure when you're not doing it that you are doing everything you can to enjoy your life.
And
life's bloody short, and they're going to end up, hating themselves.
Hey, on that note,
awesome.
Thank you so much for your time.
Very
it was lovely chatting with you.
Got me thinking, mate. I'm here for the footy, but wow, now I've gone deep.
Yeah. Lovely. Well, you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Take care. See you.
Guys.
Bye.
Lovely to meet you.
What's good, man? How are you?
Nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Angelo.
Angelo, Rich.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, Angelo. So, are you familiar with what we do? Have you seen us around?
I run explain to me little, so you go around ask questions like to spark discussions.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to ask the important but controversial questions, and then see if we can find common ground.
Okay.
So today, as you can see, we're asking
Gender pay gap, fair or unfair?
exactly
Yeah.
what. Where is your accent from?
France.
C'est français, d'accord. Ma mère est française.
Oh, really?
Mais faut parler lentement avec moi.
Okay.
But we'll switch back to English
Let's
for our
stay in
viewers.
English
Yeah,
for the viewers there.
So, what's your sense? Gender pay gap, fair or unfair?
So, I think it's, of course, contextual. Like, if it's a genuine gender pay gap, like if the boss is actually paying the employees less just because they're female, obviously that's discrimination and should be accepted. But no,
It shouldn't be accepted.
No, it shouldn't be accepted.
Yep.
Yeah, it shouldn't
I'm
be
with
accepted.
you. I agree.
Yeah.
I wanted to just make sure.
Yeah. Like if the guy is like, yeah, she's a woman, so she'll be 10% less. No,
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense.
Yep.
It should be based on skill.
Yep.
My gripe with quotas and the situation where it's being pushed too hard is that you have some cases where the person is paid less for reasons that are explained and that are not linked to the gender. For example, some studies have shown that women tend to take more sick days. They focus more on family, so like they will work less hours to be able to pick up the kids from school, stuff like that. You also had the case for Uber drivers. Women were paid less because they were doing less drives, you know.
Yep.
And the drives they were taking longer to drive, so less drives during the day, less hours work. You also have like the fact that men, because of our testosterone, or thanks to, it depends on opinion, we are more aggressive, so we'll be more inclined to ask for a raise or promotion, and when we do, we'll ask more than women do, because women tend to be more agreeable,
Yep.
which in some cases can be way much more helpful than just being aggressive like
Yep.
us men.
Yep.
So if you take all of these parameters into account, of course I'm only talking about countries which are kind of developed, in some
Yep.
countries. My family is from Africa, Morocco, Muslim states, so obviously you will have
This might be
discrimination.
slightly different, but say
Yeah, but like
in
for
most
France,
Yep.
first world country, Australia and stuff like that, where the rights are officially and legally the same, I don't think there is a proper pay gap except in some very specific circumstances.
Okay, so just to let me see if I can relay that back to you,
Yeah.
and you tell me whether I've understood correctly.
Yeah.
There may well be a gender pay gap, but is it unfair if you take into account all of those different parameters?
Yeah.
Perhaps the gender pay gap is reasonable or fair. It exists for a particular reason. Hello.
What I would say is that it is not based on gender.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, like-
it's the disparity between men and women with regard to pay is not a consequence of unfair discrimination one way or the other.
Exactly.
It's a consequence of what?
So, for example, the main studies that led to this question of the gender pay gap took like all the pay. I'm talking about France at least. I'm not so
Yep,
sure about
no
the
problem.
studies in
I've got some
Australia.
Australian ones that I'll share with you in a moment.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. Like they took all the pay of every man, even taking like athletes who have like crazy pay, but like you and I, we don't make same money as Ronaldo. We wish.
Not yet.
One day.
A couple of years' time, me and you will reunite back here.
And all the pay of every woman, do the average of that, and you see difference. But that doesn't make sense, because like I won't make the same money as a like super high engineer working for NASA or stuff like that.
Yeah. And so I think it's okay to say that there's a difference in average pay.
Yeah.
But to claim that the reason it's happening is because of unfair discrimination.
That's where I will disagree. Yeah.
Yes.
Because like you have other factors such as like English is not my
all
first
good.
language.
You can try say it in French and I'll translate.
Like the diploma, the degree a
Yes.
woman goes for. Like for example, a woman and a man will have a master, but the woman will choose like more sociological studies, which end up paying less than engineering.
Yeah. And even men and women who graduate with the same degree.
So let's say
Men and women tend to choose different subjects.
Exactly.
And women tend to choose the subjects that are associated with lower paying professions.
Yeah. Like let's say, for the sake of argument, a woman and a man, same age, same diploma, same length in the company, like they started on the same day. If the woman take more sick days, if she's less often at the office, if she work less hours, she will end up being paid less because she will have less opportunities to have a raise. Let's say they do the same hours and they don't take any sick leaves, both of them. So they're really on almost very equal grounds. Men tend to be more aggressive, which means more risk taking, which means they will ask their boss more often for raise and higher raise than women.
I know that some people have said, okay, in an instance like that, it's important for young women to receive or to have access to assertiveness training. So training that helps them negotiate within, say, 4 pay rises, which I think is a great idea. I think everyone ought to learn the skill of negotiation.
Yeah, such an important skill on the day-to-day life.
But another kind of parameter that I want to throw in is that in the research that I was doing in the Australian context, what is it? It's called the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. So it's a government department, and they're responsible for kind of monitoring this and ensuring that there's no illegal discrimination based on sex or gender in the workplace. And the gender pay gap, just taking all of the full-time working men and all of the full-time working women, was approximately 16%.
Yeah.
But it was also found that full-time working men, on average, still work more hours than full-time working women. So if you take all full-time working men and then you look at what percentage of them work 60 plus hours a week, it's approximately 9%. Whereas if you take
60 hours.
if you take all the full-time working women and then look at how many of them or what percentage of them work more than 60 hours a week, it's roughly 3%.
Yes.
So it's another parameter, right, or another variable worth considering. The last one for me that also, when I was doing the research for this, for me, it really came down to those hours worked and then also the job type. So my sense is that regardless of gender, if you work, it's reasonable for people in different jobs to get paid differently, right? Because different jobs have certain economic value and whatnot. And that if men choose more difficult jobs, or jobs that hold high levels of stress or essentially hold more economic value, then it's reasonable for men to get paid more on average than women.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
The one thing that I guess where my research ends is the question that I have is how much of the difference in job choices is a consequence of free will and men and women making their own choices, and how much of it is a consequence of gender stereotypes or discrimination.
Yeah, then you go to the question of nature versus nurture.
Right.
I think the opinion is very disparate across the board. My case, from the research I've done, I will be more into nature. But that's just an opinion. I think that's because of the hormones specifically. Men will have more tendency to go for like the riskier jobs.
Yep.
While women are more into emotional stuff, so like teaching, especially like teaching young kids, stuff like that. But then like that's just an opinion on nature versus nurture. That's a whole other debate. Depend.
Which when I was doing research for this, I was led down that rabbit hole as well. And my sense is that it's a combination, right? Anyone says it's all nature or anyone says it's all nurture, it's like, it's somewhere in the middle, right? I can acknowledge that if you grow up in a home that says, because you're a man, you can't do nursing, you have to do engineering, of course that's going to incentivize you in that particular direction. And if we have that on a grand scale, it may well promote men or encourage men to go into more higher paying professions, more scalable professions like technology, like STEM, and that it might disincentivize women from going on into those roles. But how much of that is really at play? It's hard to tell.
Have you looked into the Norwegian paradox? I think it's called the Norwegian paradox.
Yes, yeah. For our viewers, do you want to explain what it is?
Basically, Norway is considered one of the most equalitarian countries in terms of genders, and yet the same stereotypes still happen naturally in a way. Some people will say it's because it's not equalitarian. Some people will say it's nature. Like it's a proof that it's nature.
I'm
very sorry.
Sorry,
My partner is
Oh, no problems at all. Angelo, thanks for taking the time, man.
Good
There,
day.
you have a lovely
Bye.
night. Max, Rich.
Great.
Braith, nice to meet you. Gender pay gap, fair or unfair, what do you think?
Wait, is it
Bro,
like?
just imagine the Mac beach ball.
Are we assuming?
it's like,
Are we assuming it's true? I'm a bit confused.
okay, well you tell me, is it true? Well, does it exist? Maybe let's start there.
I'll have to think.
I
about
think
it.
yes.
I think it depends on the field.
Yeah, I agree.
Tell me
Depends
more.
on the field.
Depends on the field you go into, the position in the field you go into. I feel like more men go into more dangerous jobs.
More physical labour jobs.
Physical labour
You'd
jobs,
find
which
less
in
women.
turn obviously pays more. And it depends on what role you are in that job as well. So if you're like a bottom level, you're not going to get paid as much as someone like a manager in that job as well.
Yep.
And I feel like men typically do go for those more physical jobs and dangerous jobs. And so in turn they get paid more.
Which is why men make up 90% of workplace deaths, as
Yes.
an example.
Yes.
So let's start by seeing if we can establish some common ground. If we were all working the same job for the same number of hours each week, and we were both doing the work equally well, do we agree that all of us should be paid the same?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Are we assuming this is Australia or like all over the world?
Yeah, let's stick to Australia. It's probably easier to.
I think the gender gap would be much more like equal here.
So what's good, man?
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to stop.
Nah, that's all
I
good.
was just FaceTiming my brother. You say hi?
Yo, what's good, man? What's good? Gender pay gap, fair or unfair? What do you reckon?
Yo, what's going on, boys? Wait, I'm doing an intro.
Yeah, boys,
Yo,
bro.
what's going on, boys?
So let me unpack that a little bit. So in Australia, bro, we're just in the middle of an interview. If you want to come back in a couple of minutes,
Can
yeah.
we film?
Uh,
Okay, I'm filming, go.
I love Melbourne. Okay, so the gender pay gap in Australia, part-time and full-time, averaged across men and women, it's about 31%.
Fair or unfair?
So now the question,
difference between.
Wait, you reckon?
difference between all working men and all working women sits at about 31% in Australia.
Okay, yeah.
So the question is then, is it fair or unfair? Is it fair or unfair? And do you want me to just hold the phone, bro?
Yeah, go.
Is it fair or unfair?
Love you, boys.
And if we account for something like type of jobs worked, what's good, homie? You take this one back. Do you boys know each other or not?
I know him.
You boys are getting nasty.
He's just some NPC that's fucking.
So I think his code's a bit broken. So let's
Oh yeah, I love the gender pay gap.
let's
Oh, wait, no, I love listening to it.
so let's say that
I love reducing it.
Let's say that
Make it bigger.
we agree that, bro. Sorry, bro. If you could just let us finish the interview and then come back a little bit later. So it sits at 31%, right?
Yep.
If we control for only full-time working men and full-time working women, it drops to about 16% in Australia. So now the question is like, okay, what are the causes of it? If it's discrimination against women because they're women, I'm not for it, and I assume you boys wouldn't be for it either.
No.
So, what's your sense as to why that gender pay gap, 16%, exists between full-time working men and full-time working women? You mentioned choosing dangerous roles. Yep. What else could be a factor?
Are we assuming this is a pay that is like based on the government, like they say this is the minimum pay for everyone, or is it like the managers are paying them? So it's
it's like reporting as to how much men and women are being paid. Bro, you're so cold. I feel like I want to give you a little. So, yeah, let's say that it's accurate reporting on income of men and women.
might be a little bit of sexism in it,
Might be. Yep.
because I do bartender. I'm a bartender
Yep.
in uni, and this new girl came in, and she's getting like 4 shifts a week. I'm getting nothing, and I work I have the same availabilities as her, if not more. Like, because I think there's probably about 10 bartenders, 2 of us are boys, me and a guy named Wilson, and
Yep.
we barely get any shifts.
So, do you think that you're being discriminated against based on your sex? Because are they?
Honestly, yeah, I feel like it is.
So interesting.
I feel like it is.
So
I feel
interesting.
like I am. Yeah.
How's that male privilege feeling?
It's great. It's great.
It's,
So it's very interesting because, okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. You could make a case that she's a better bartender than you because she's a woman. So let me try and make that case. I don't necessarily believe this,
She's newer than you though.
She's
So
newer
she's
than me,
less
yeah.
experienced.
but if the bar's goal is to sell more drinks,
oh yeah, like,
you'd
yeah,
want
yeah,
it
yeah.
to
Because
do it, sure.
we have the pokies, and all the girls that go around the pokies with they're all girls. They're all Thai girls that they've all brought in. That the bar, like the
Guess
managers
more
are brought in.
appealing to
Yeah,
people
it's
that
more-
work- that
yeah.
are
I had
spending
a friend, my roommate. She worked at a bakery. When they wanted to sell bread, the managers would always get girls to walk around and try and sell it because it's.
so interesting, right? And so maybe that is, I mean, given that they're partly better at the role, or they're partly better at performing the role for the company because of their sex, is it fair that you as a male be discriminated against? Because some
it's not
people
fair,
might
no.
say, you'd say no?
No,
Because I think you could almost make the argument that yes, it's fair,
Oh.
because you might say that well, that's good. You might say that she's better at the role than you simply by way of being a female.
true.
is so interesting.
Yeah.
thought of
Like
this
same hourly and all that. Just she has more shifts, and like I got shit to pay. I didn't get any work next week. This is the second time I've got 0 work, and I got like bills to pay. I got uni. uni
It's
rent.
happened just since she started working as well. So
I don't know. Possibly, but I've seen like I can see like the roster, and she's got like 4 shifts a week,
Yeah, right.
and I get 1 or 2 at the most.
So, okay, so there can be an element of discrimination based on sex that might be responsible for a type of gender pay gap. I haven't seen any evidence that there is systemic or widespread unfair discrimination against women to produce that gender pay gap. I've heard of specific instances, perhaps like, for example, with the specific instance that you just gave, even though it's the other way around.
It's subjective. I think it's what industry you work in. If you happen to get a good manager or I happen to get a manager that's sexist, it's just
Yeah,
dependent.
right. And so
It's subjective,
I think all of us are against sexism, like we established before.
Yeah.
The only widespread or like large study that I saw where there was a gender pay gap that was a consequence or that had nothing to do with performance was at Google. And they realized they were underpaying a particular level of male software engineer, and they paid out have you heard this one?
I've heard.
I think it was 2019, and they paid out $10 million in recompense, which is very interesting because I could not find, and you know, if someone's watching this, by all means, point it out to me, but I could not find a similar instance where for the same role, performing it just as well, working similar hours, women were earning less just by way of being women.
Yeah, that's what I saw as well. Everything where there was a difference, there was either a difference in the role of the job, difference of what the job was, and that's why, like the articles I read, it said men getting paid more than the women, but then it actually, I watched people that looked into it, and they were doing different roles in the job, so obviously it's not going to be the same pay between the two genders, and it was just different jobs. Obviously it's not going to be the same, but as with the Google one, same role, same everything, and there's a disparity, but because it's not going in way of what people like to think it normally does, you don't hear about it as much.
Yep. Agreed. All right, a lot of common ground found there, boys. You gents, have a good night.
What's
bro, this is sexy, boy. Damn, son. Yeah, common ground combos. So, Mac, a gender pay gap, fair or unfair, what's your sense?
Depending on how you define it, unfair usually though.
Okay, how would you define it?
2 ways. One, like how they're paid in the same workplace, how they're paid in general. If it's in general, it's unfair because it's usually because women are pushed into certain groups that aren't as high paying as men, which is a bit iffy. And in same job situations, it's like a 2-cent difference, which 2 cents is still a bit more. If it was 1 cent, I would be okay. It's still a little off, but it's like almost nothing.
Right, so just to make sure that I understand your position then, if we control for job type and say hours worked as well, it seems that the gender pay gap is roughly, I mean, my sense it's somewhere between 0 and 4%. It's pretty similar to the 2%, 2% figure that you just shared. Now, you just mentioned that your sense is some women might be getting pushed into a particular industry or particular role. What gives you that sense that they're being pushed into a particular way?
Just the general societal standard of like women being weaker, not being smarter. It's like weird.
Not being smarter? Does anyone in the 21st century believe that?
You would be surprised. I've seen way too many.
Well, I guess you and I certainly don't believe that. Oh, that's my sense.
No, women, men have the same brain. Doesn't matter.
I wouldn't say they have the same brain, but I would say
They're
they have
born
the same...
with the same brain. It's how they're raised that makes it different.
It's so interesting. Okay, I think we're going to disagree here, but this will be interesting. So the differences between males and females, let's say, for example, in terms of the jobs that they work, do you think that it's solely a consequence of socialization?
Yeah.
Or do you think there's an element of biology to it?
Solely socialization.
Okay, so interesting. So this is where we won't find common ground, but let me kind of dig a little bit deeper as to why you believe what you believe, and then I'll share with you why I believe what I believe, and we'll see where we end up. So what gives you the sense that it's solely socialization as opposed to having an element of biology?
So I don't have a psychology or neurology degree.
That's all good.
I'm going to an arts field, but when I speak to like my friends who do work in psychology or neurology, they bring up this new fact that's been discovered in like the last 5 years, that being born, like when humans are born, they're born with the same brain, but it's highly malleable. So societal impacts that happen create huge distinctions. So there is difference between an adult female and adult male brain on average, but it's usually because, I mean, society treats them differently at birth.
Okay, so I partially agree with you. So I think that there is an interplay between socialization and physiology, and perhaps also the temperamental differences between men and women, and perhaps that socialization plays a role in the types of jobs that men and women select for, or the type of industries they go into. I'd like to present to you why I believe there's also an element of biology, and you tell me whether you think I might be missing something. So, because I partially agree with you, but I also think there's an element of biology. So, from the research that I've done, it looks to me like there are significant temperamental differences between men and women, or perhaps better summarized as there are some significant psychological differences between men and women. So one example of that is in sexual selection. We select for and are attracted to different characteristics. So for example, females tend to be attracted to certain traits in a male, males tend to be attracted to certain traits in a female. And I wouldn't say that that's a consequence of socialization. I'd say that it is a consequence of largely biology. Beyond that, within the realm of temperament, there are also significant differences between males and females. So if you look at, if you use the Big Five model, which is like it's just a framework for measuring what's your personality, what's my personality.
I think I've seen it before.
There are five measures. Men and women differ in two of them in particular, namely agreeableness and neuroticism. So women tend to be more agreeable on average, men tend to be more disagreeable on average, which is to say you can break down agreeableness into compassion, empathy, willingness to negotiate on behalf of the other person's perspective, right? So women tend to rate more highly in that, men tend to rate more lowly. The second, neuroticism, is also called negative emotionality. It's like how susceptible are you, or what type of affinity do you have for experiencing negative emotions like anxiety and depression? And so what threshold of a stressor does it take to instigate an anxiety response or a depression response? And women tend to rate more highly on it, men tend to rate more lower on it. And there are theories about why that is. It might be due to women's, evolutionarily speaking, their relationship to the infant, but perhaps I'll leave that rabbit hole off to the side. So there are temperamental differences. Now the question is, are those temperamental differences socialized, or a consequence of socialization, or are they a consequence of biology? There was one study that I looked at, 80,000 people surveyed across 76 different countries, and those countries were rank ordered in terms of how egalitarian those countries were, right? So how little gender stereotypes there were, might be another way of thinking
Netherlands ranked the highest on that, right? Or am I wrong?
Yeah, the Scandinavian countries rank the highest. So you would expect that the more egalitarian, so the less rigid the gender stereotypes, the more similar the personalities between men and women are. The exact opposite happened. So in those Scandinavian countries, you see the personality differences between men and women increase.
But didn't they also find that in like the Middle East, an area where there is a big difference in discrimination? Didn't they find there was like a higher rate of female engineers there? It was something like that?
If you can find that and perhaps explain why you think that would...
I don't know why, I just heard, because it kind of it seems a little random, but I may just be wrong here.
No, that's all good. Maybe that's something I can look into as well tonight. What's up, man? So, to me, that seems like when we remove the rigid gender stereotypes, there is still a biological underpinning as to why there are temperamental differences between men and women. One more thing. Men and women differ in their interest in things versus people. And it's close to one standard deviation difference between the two. So that can have implications for the type of jobs, say for example, that men and women choose. Now the question is that socialization or is it biological? There's evidence that I found when I was researching this, that interest in things and people develops or is closely related to in utero testosterone exposure. So if you have boy or girl, if you have high in utero testosterone exposure, you are more likely to exhibit a more masculine temperament, including more of an interest towards things as opposed to people. So that type of person would be more, generally speaking, more interested in, say, a profession in engineering as opposed to a profession in nursing and healthcare. So it looks like there is, to me, it certainly seems like there is a biological underpinning as to why men and women differ psychologically in terms of their temperament as well as in terms of their interest in things and people. So what that leads me to is, okay, if we know that, assuming that's true and assuming I've done my due diligence, we should expect men and women to choose different roles and different industries if they are given free choice to do so and not forced into any particular field because of their gender or gender stereotypes, which is part of the reason why I think the gender pay gap is fair. Did that all make sense to you? Are you still with me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I touch? So the first thing you said was attraction.
Yes.
The men are interested in more feminine, women are interested in more masculine. That really doesn't hold up across history. Like the further back you go, it's like 200 years back. Like men were into like really oversized, more masculine, muscular women because it was, you were more wealthy if you had that sort of body shape. So attraction has changed based on societal standard over the years.
Now, just to quickly jump in there, based on my research, that's not necessarily true. That there are certain elements of what people find attractive that change between cultures and over time as well. But there are also some rather consistent things that we do find attractive. So, for example, just one of them that comes to mind is males tend to be consistently cross-culturally attracted to an hourglass physique because it's a sign of fertility. So we've developed as a male.
But a sign of fertility is usually how much is what society sees as like.
Sorry. It might not be. It's also, sorry to interrupt. It's not just fertility. It's also the ability to bear child without complication. So you have the type of physique that I've evolutionarily evolved so as to have an instinct that goes, that female is going to have a greater likelihood of being able to bear my child successfully without complication. So assuming that's, I guess this is where we might have different sources and might have information, we might run into some trouble, but was there anything else that I said that you disagreed with?
So your final statement about testosterone levels creating difference in temperament and ability,
yes,
I do agree that
testosterone exposure in utero.
Yeah, the chemicals we produce does make a slight difference, so that may be actually a case. But you went on a difference earlier about, God, what was your second point? You had something up.
Sexual attraction, big five temperamental differences.
Yeah, yet again, I feel like that's pretty explainable with how society raises their children. They raise women to, be more agreeable, just accept what's happening. And they raise men to be more just independent. You can't ask for help.
And more disagreeable, more assertive. So my sense was the same as yours, okay? What changed for me was coming across this study that I kind of mentioned to you, because let's say that was the reason why men and women differ temperamentally. I would then expect that the most egalitarian countries, we would find the smallest difference in temperament between men and women. That's what I would expect if it was a consequence of socialization.
But doesn't...
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
But then the opposite is what was found in that study.
But egalitarian just means how society treats women. It still doesn't mean how they raise it. It may be more, but is it like significantly more, or is it just like 5% difference?
Yeah, well, so the idea was that in the countries that have gone the furthest to get rid of gender stereotypes and promote gender liberation, which I'm very much for, whether you're a male or female, do what you want, do what you love. In the countries that have done the most to establish or get rid of those rigid stereotypes, the temperamental difference between men and women increased. Right, so very counterintuitive.
But like, was it by a significant margin or a small margin?
My understanding was that it was a significant margin. Yeah, which is why it was such a surprising study. So I can kind of see your brain ticking here.
Yeah, no. In that case, I probably would be wrong.
And this is okay. So this is where we perhaps then find common ground, that it's a combination of both socialization and underlying biology. Now, how much is socialization and how much is biology? Tough question. I'm not sure. But my sense is that it's both. And it seems like you're now beginning to potentially come a little closer that way as well.
Maybe. It's the whole idea though that like study after study, it's just like after like we got past 2010, we started to realize that a lot of our research is like very biased, because we found consistently that we couldn't match like a standard between the average man and woman brain. And that to me signified, like in every test, it's always been random when it's just been looking at how the brain activation works during such, which means it may have something to do with biology, but that would be probably a very small margin. But that small margin may affect stuff like job interest to an extreme extent. I don't know.
Yeah, just to perhaps highlight how you and I might disagree again, which is fine. Like that's what we're about healthy disagreement and then working through it. So based on the research that I've looked at, you are able to tell the difference between a male and female brain, or better put, a more masculinized and a more feminized brain. And a lot of that is a consequence of exposure to testosterone during development. Is my sense so far.
I read this like a little bit ago. It was like a year or two ago, so my memory may be fuzzy.
Oh, all good. Yep.
But we took a test. We said, here are the traits that we expect to find in a man and woman.
Yep.
We gave an AI and said, find these traits. And it was and there was something like they could not find a single man or woman brain that fit a significant amount of those traits.
Interesting.
So
we might have to wrap up, Macca, because these guys are about to start up. But hey, I really appreciate you taking the time, man. I appreciate the attitude that you brought and your ability as well to express yourself. It's really gives me a lot of hope that someone as young as you, if you don't mind me asking, how young are you?
18.
18. Gives me a lot of hope that you're able to articulate yourself like that, and that we're able to have healthy disagreements and kind of work through them and see where we find common ground. So I appreciate your time, man.
Thank you.
Take care, Mac. I'll see ya. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, that is a wrap for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you support the mission here at CGC, you believe that open and respectful dialogue is the way forward, then do us a favor and drop a like on the video. It signals to YouTube that we are doing important work and other people ought to see it too. And if you want to get notified when we drop our next episode, sub to the channel and hit the notification bell icon below. If you want more of these combos in your own life, feel free to grab yourself a deck of our controversial conversation cards as well. They're an easy way to skip the chit chat and gamify the process of asking and exploring these juicy questions in your own life. There'll be a link for those in the description if you're interested. And with all that said, remember this one last thing. You are a part of the solution here. Your voice matters, your curiosity is not a crime. Keep asking these important but controversial questions in your own life and doing your best to try and find common ground. Until next time, stay connected with us on Instagram. You can shoot us a DM over there, or on TikTok for when we go live so we can actually engage in these conversations together. And take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.